So thanks to everybody for joining us. It's just such a blessing and encouragement to have you here. We just want to share a little bit tonight. To start with, Eric and I are just going to share a little bit about our story, of how God's been working in our lives and kind of brought us to the point where we are now, and a little bit about what's to come. Soon, I have had a few people ask if Joshua, our son, was going to be here tonight, and I wish he was, but we still have some more waiting to do for that. So, my part of the story starts at a pretty young age, probably around 8 years old. And I grew up in rural Iowa, in a pretty non-diverse community, but our church had a sister church here in Chicago, downtown in the Green area. And each summer, kids from this church, which was primarily African American, would come and stay with families from our church for a week. And so their lives here were filled, with seeing a lot of drug use, gangs, violence. And then they'd come to our house, and our family developed a especially strong relationship with a little boy who would keep coming back each year. And we just grew in our love for him. He became sort of like our little brother. But also in realizing, I began to realize at a pretty young age that not everybody was like me, and that there were a lot of kids throughout the world with a lot of needs. So, for example, I remember when he first came to our house, he thought we lived in a park, just because there was green grass and trees. And then we, parked our car in the garage, and we're getting out, and he tried to lock all the doors, and just started to see that very different type of lifestyle that he needed to live, to always be on guard. Eventually, when I was in junior high, then I had the chance to go and see this church and where these families lived. And so we actually stayed in the church there, but overnight, just for safety. But we did get to go and visit a family's home one evening. And so then I got to kind of have a little bit of the experience of just kind of the danger and the fear that they live with day to day, as we followed our host into the apartment complex. They would peer around the corner and then run, the flight of stairs, and then kind of do that over and over until we finally got safely into the apartment. And then shortly after that, I also read a book called There Are No Children Here. And it just really began to give me, I'd say at that point, just a slight understanding that there are a lot of kids who never get to be kids, or who never live to be adults. And so these experiences just opened my eyes to kids throughout the world. And then gradually, many years down the road, I majored in psychology and became a counselor primarily in order to help children, because God just kept building that desire in my heart. And my first counseling job actually was working with children in foster care. And so I found myself thinking more about just helping kids potentially by providing a family for them, either as a foster parent or through adoption. In that same time frame, I met Eric, and we got married, and then a few years down the road had Nathan and Brooke. And throughout those years, I was just learning more about God's heart for orphan, and hearing stories of adoption, and just the great need of kids throughout the world to have a family. And so continued to find myself thinking more and more about adopting. So I talked with Eric about these thoughts and just the desire of my heart, knowing that if it was something God was calling us to, that he would lead both of us in this direction. And Eric's initial response was one of surprise, because it was something that he'd never really thought about or had really much contact with. So I encouraged him to think about it and pray about it, and then a few months later, kind of checked in with him, and a few months later checked in with him again, and was praying about it a lot during that time, but not really seeing any openness from him, or really too much thought process about it. So I began the process of kind of letting go of my plan and my dream of adopting, and just lay it in the Lord's hand, trusting God, that he'd fulfill the desire that I had to care for orphans, but maybe not in this way. Maybe years down the road through a job or through working at an orphanage or something. And so I didn't know it at that time, but as I was sort of letting go of my process and trusting God, God was also opening Eric's heart to this dream and desire to adopt. And so I'll let him jump in and share his process.
So the story doesn't end with Jill. She kind of shared with you guys the hesitation that I had toward adoption was very real. And to her credit, as she just explained, I didn't really give it a lot of thought and was very kind of opposed to the idea of adoption, actually. I loved the idea of adoption from a standpoint of, yeah, these kids need families, they need love, they need support, God calls us, but I never really felt that that was something for us. And I went so far as to believe that if we were going to have another kid, it was going to be a biological child, and not an adopted child. But God has a way of changing things around, and I'm so thankful for that. He has this way of brought markers into my life that were very telling and kind of redirected my journey. Thinking of the mile markers as you drive down the highway and you see kind of the destination that you're going to and the direction that you're heading, and it tells you your place of where you're going. God very much did the same thing with me. After this last opportunity that Jill challenged me to think about it and to pray about it, I finally agreed that I would give this some very, very considerable thought. That June of 2010, I was invited out to Colorado for a 3-day youth worker brainstorming vision retreat with an organization called Group and Simple Youth Ministry. And there's a small group of us youth workers, youth pastors, with their leadership, about 15 of us, and we did some brainstorming, had a lot of fun, and fellowship with one another. But one particular night, we were having dinner in the backyard of this director's home up in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I found myself, after I grabbed my barbecue beef and Coke and chips, I went to go sit down on the patio. I found myself literally walking into a conversation about adoption. There were 2 other youth workers there that were on either side of me, one whose name was Eric, with a K, from Oregon, and the other one was Brian, who is a youth pastor down in Southern California. And they were both discussing, unbeknownst to me, their current steps at that point of adopting children. Brian was in the process of adopting from two children from Zambia, and Eric with a K was adopting a brother and a sister from Ethiopia.